Have you ever wondered how much someone can truly hide behind a smile, until the moment they no longer need to pretend? That thought echoed in my mind the morning I received her call. I was standing on a rooftop in Athens, inspecting post-quake housing layouts for displaced families when my phone rang. Natalie's voice was calm. Too calm. "I've sold the Oregon house," she said, like it was a casual line in a real estate brochure. "Trent and I are moving forward. I figured you'd prefer staying at a hotel when you get back. You're always traveling anyway." She chuckled lightly, as if the past 18 years were a minor footnote. I didn't raise my voice, didn't plead. I simply asked, "When did you sign the papers?" Her silence didn't last long, but it was enough. "You see, I've spent my entire life designing homes that withstand storms. So when I sensed one coming to my own doorstep, I did what I do best. I reinforced the foundation. Quietly, thoroughly, and long before she thought to tear it all down. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the cost of underestimating the man who stays calm, the man who plans, the man you never see coming until it's too late. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, or just want to know how to protect what you've built, stay with me, and if this story speaks to something in you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts below. I read every comment. My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 54 years old. For most of my adult life, I've designed homes for people who lost theirs. Earthquakes, wildfires, war zones, you name it. My work has taken me to broken places all over the world. I've helped rebuild refugee neighborhoods in Turkey, restructured storm-hit properties along the Gulf Coast, and spent 4 years consulting with housing nonprofits across Southeast Asia. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the strongest structures are rarely the ones you notice, because they don't crack under pressure. That was always my philosophy, not just in my work, but in my marriage. Quiet, strong, thoughtful. You don't need to raise your voice when you understand the foundation. You don't need chaos when you've built carefully. I met Natalie 16 years ago in Portland. She was an interior designer with sharp instincts and a fast tongue. Everything about her seemed alive, vibrant, confident, magnetic. We moved fast. Within a year, we'd bought a small fixer-upper near Cannon Beach, a windswept stretch of Oregon coastline, cold mornings, thick fog, ocean silence. I fell in love with that silence. Together, we transformed that house from a faded coastal shell into a sanctuary. I did the beams and boardwork. She picked the tiles and fixtures. It took 5 years and more weekends than I could count, but it became ours. Natalie called it our forever place. I believed her. We never had kids. We poured everything into the life we were building. The house, the trips, the dinners. When I traveled for work, she stayed back and ran her boutique interior studio, working with vacation property owners and small hotels. She had charm, taste, presence. Everyone loved her. So did I. But somewhere along the way, without any dramatic event or storm, something began to shift. Not all at once. More like the way salt water corrodes steel. Slow, invisible, and only obvious. Once the damage is done, she stopped asking about my projects, started declining trips she used to beg to join. Her text messages got shorter, colder. No more miss you already. No more can't wait until you're home. Just things like safe flight and let me know when you land. Still, I said nothing. I didn't push. I believed in structure. And I believed that sometimes distance is just a phase. But what I didn't realize, what I didn't want to admit, was that Natalie wasn't drifting. She was detaching, quietly, strategically, and eventually completely. By the time she made that phone call in Athens, I understood. The house, the years, the promises, none of it had mattered to her in the way it had to me. But if she thought I'd built a life without reinforcing the foundation, she didn't know me at all. That's where the real story begins. The first time I noticed the crack, it was small, easy to ignore. Natalie started staying out later than usual, blaming client dinners or design expos. At first I believed her. Trust was something I gave freely, especially to someone I had built a life with down to every joint in the floorboards of our home. Then came the gym membership. It sounded innocent enough. She said she needed something new, a way to decompress, to reclaim her body. I supported her, of course. She'd always been health conscious and I respected her drive. But within weeks, the gym became a daily ritual. Morning sessions, evening classes, extended weekend workshops. That's when she began mentioning Trent, her new personal trainer, former collegiate athlete turned wellness coach. At first it was casual, stories about his workout routines, his inspiring discipline, his recovery from a past injury. She dropped his name into conversations the way someone might name drop a favorite author. At first, I didn't think much of it. Then I began to notice patterns. New charges on our joint card, high-end juice bars, spa services, private training sessions. Her wardrobe changed too. Subtle at first, new leggings, designer gym bags. Then came the spa retreats, always with friends from the studio I'd never met. I asked once gently where the sudden interest in luxury self-care had come from. She smiled and said I wouldn't understand. "You're too practical, Marcus. You don't believe in indulging yourself." She was right. I didn't. I believed in structure, in discipline, in building slowly and with intention. So I didn't confront her. I didn't storm into the gym or install tracking apps on her phone. I didn't follow the advice of colleagues who'd gone through similar betrayals, hiring private investigators, digging through emails. I observed. I waited. And I prepared. I began taking longer walks alone along the coast in the early mornings, letting the cold sea air clear my thoughts. I reviewed old financial documents late at night when she was out, cross-referencing changes, tracking new accounts. And one morning, about 11 months before the call from Athens, I walked into our lawyer's office with a very specific request, asked for the house to be placed in a dual asset protection trust under the name of my late father's estate, a move I could justify legally as part of broader asset planning for inheritance and tax purposes. The trust was irrevocable. The paperwork would be buried among refinancing documents for a separate investment property we co-owned. Natalie signed everything without reading, busy texting while the notary explained the clauses. I told her it was standard restructuring. "It protects both of us," I said. That part wasn't a lie. The house would be safe, no matter what came next. And while she spent her afternoons building trust with a man lifting weights, I was building legal walls around everything I had worked for. She thought I was standing still, but I was already moving, just not in the direction she expected. It was a Tuesday morning in Athens. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and I was standing on the rooftop of a half-finished building, watching the mist lift off the city's battered skyline. We were finalizing blueprints for modular housing that could be assembled in a week, emergency shelters for families who'd lost everything to the quake. That's when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway, stepping away from the others to take the call in silence. "Marcus," Natalie said, her voice unusually bright. "I've made a decision. I've sold the house." Just like that. No preamble, no hesitation. I remember the way my breath caught for half a second, not because I was surprised, but because I realized she thought this would break me. She continued, sounding like a woman reading from a rehearsed script. "Trent and I are starting a new chapter. We found a place in Sedona. There's a wellness retreat opportunity he wants to pursue and, well, we're ready." "We?" "Yes," she said, with the kind of finality that doesn't invite argument. "The beach house sold last week. We closed yesterday. The buyers are moving in next month. I didn't think you'd mind staying at a hotel when you return." Then she laughed, not maliciously but lightly, like she just told me the punchline of a joke that only she found funny. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how long. I only asked one question. "When did you sign the final papers?" There was a pause, a short one, but long enough for me to know she hadn't expected that question. "Yesterday morning," she said. "Why?" "No reason," I replied calmly. "Thanks for letting me know." and I hung up. I didn't move for a while. I stood there with my phone in my hand, staring out over a city half in ruins, half under construction. Men below were lifting steel beams into place, welding new supports, rebuilding what had been shattered. That image stuck with me, the quiet determination of people who'd lost everything and yet kept rebuilding. I walked back into the hotel, sat at the small desk near the window, and opened my laptop. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory, guiding them through the keystrokes I'd practiced in my mind for weeks. 2 emails. One to Elaine Turner, my estate lawyer. The other to Gregory Hsu, a real estate fraud specialist I'd consulted quietly a few months ago. Subject line, urgent, unauthorized property transaction attempt, Ellison residence. I attached a copy of the deed, the one I'd carried with me on every overseas trip for years. It was a habit from the early days of my career, when I once lost a client's entire portfolio due to a botched document handoff. Since then, I'd kept the originals close. The deed made it clear. The Oregon. Property wasn't owned by Natalie and me. It was held in the Ellison Legacy Trust. Sole trustee, Marcus Ellison. Irrevocable, undivided, shielded. In that moment, sitting in a quiet hotel room while the rest of the city prepared for another uncertain day, I felt something shift. Not anger. Clarity. She hadn't just tried to leave me. She'd tried to erase me. From the life we built, from the home I restored, from the future I protected, and she thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I wouldn't fight back. But Natalie had forgotten the one thing I never overlook, the fine print. I didn't tell Natalie I was coming home early. There was no warning, no announcement, just a silent flight from Athens to Seattle, followed by a 2-hour drive to the coast. The skies were gray when I arrived, mist clinging to the trees, the kind of soft rain that settles into wood grain and memory. The house sat on its bluff, just as it always had. But everything felt different. Not because it had changed, because I had. There was a black SUV parked in my usual spot. New, flashy, Arizona plates. I stood for a moment beside the car, noting the yoga mat in the back seat, the half-drunk green juice in the cup holder, the gym, duffel on the passenger side embroidered with a TL Trent Lewis. So, he was already home. I didn't ring the bell. I used my key. The lock turned as easily as it always had. She hadn't changed it. Part of me had expected resistance, some symbolic barricade. But instead, the door opened to music playing in the background, soft indie pop and the faint scent of rosemary candles. A voice laughed in the kitchen. Then hers, Natalie's, responded with something light, playful. I heard Trent's name, stepped inside, suitcase in hand, and walked slowly toward the sound. They were standing by the island, 2 wine glasses on the counter, a charcuterie board half assembled. Natalie wore a linen-wrapped dress I didn't recognize. Trent stood behind her, holding a tablet and gesturing at something on a blueprint. "I'm thinking we knock out this wall," he said. "Open up the space, add some natural light." Natalie nodded. "And maybe a skylight in the hallway, make it feel more like a retreat." Neither of them saw me until I was already in the room. Natalie turned first. Her smile faltered, lips parting, but no words forming. "Marcus," she said, recovering quickly. "You're early." "Clearly," I replied, glancing at Trent. He stepped back slightly, letting go of her waist. The arm that had been resting casually on her hip disappeared as if it had never been there. "This is awkward," Trent said, giving a sheepish half-smile. "I should probably—" "No," I interrupted, setting my bag down. "You should probably stay. This involves you too, apparently." Natalie's expression hardened. "Marcus, this doesn't have to be dramatic. I've been unhappy for a long time. We both deserve peace." I nodded slowly. "I agree. Which is why I've already spoken to my attorney about the fraudulent sale attempt you initiated last week." Her face changed instantly. The color drained. "What are you talking about?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out 2 documents, the trust deed and a cease and desist notice. I placed them on the counter between the goat cheese and the prosciutto. This house isn't yours to sell, Natalie. It hasn't been for almost a year. Trent looked confused. Wait, what? You said the deal was done. It was, she snapped, eyes scanning the papers. I watched the realization set in like a slow fever. Her mouth opened, then closed. She flipped through the pages frantically. This isn't possible, she whispered. Oh, it's not only possible, I said. It's binding. You signed the transfer documents last February. The house is owned solely by the Ellison Legacy Trust. You don't have title. You don't have claim. And your buyer? A shell company registered to Trent's cousin. We know. Trent took a step back. You said he'd never find out. Natalie ignored him. You tricked me. No, I replied calmly. I protected what was mine. You chose not to read what you signed. That's not trickery, that's negligence. She reached for her phone. I'm calling my lawyer. You should, I said. And tell him I'll be staying at the cottage until further notice. Oh, and Natalie, this house, it's not going anywhere. I turned and walked back to the front door. Behind me, the sound of stunned silence settled into the walls. The same walls they had planned to tear down. But those walls were mine. And they were going to hold. The next morning, I drove to Elaine Turner's law office in Portland. It was early, barely past 7, and the building was still quiet. Elaine had agreed to meet me before the day's schedule began. She was already in her conference room, a black folder open on the table and a coffee mug steaming beside it. She looked tired, focused. I assume you saw what I sent last night, she said as I sat down. I nodded. Some of it. I'd rather hear it directly. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were account statements, transaction reports, and digital trails that laid everything bare. Natalie hadn't simply tried to sell the house. That was just one branch of something much bigger. She'd been siphoning money for over a year, moving funds from our joint account into a separate business entity. Revive Collective LLC, registered in Arizona, listed as co-founders, Natalie Ellison and Trent Lewis. Looks like they've been building a spa retreat concept for about 8 months, Elaine explained. Boutique wellness brand. Upscale, high-margin, targeting divorced professionals and early retirees. The branding documents were professionally designed. Their business plan included acquisition of coastal properties, homes like ours, converted into luxury getaway packages. Their pilot location was set to be our Oregon house. I scanned the numbers. She'd moved $112,000 into the business account. Another $34,000 had been used for design consultants, social media marketing, and digital branding agencies. She used everything we built, I said quietly. Everything I earned. Elaine was silent. She handed me another sheet. There's more. It was a record of recent communication between Natalie and Bryce Landon, Trent's cousin and the managing partner of Cascadia Retreat Holdings. The shell company wasn't just a buyer. It was a buffer, a shield, meant to allow the transaction to pass quietly under the radar. Once title was transferred, the house would be resold to Revive Collective at a marked-up value, legitimizing the flip. They were laundering the deal, Elaine said. On paper, it would look like a clean 2-stage transaction. You'd come home to a sold house, no claim to the sale, and they'd pocket the margin. I stared at the ceiling for a moment, trying to wrap my mind around the precision of it. This wasn't an affair, I finally said. Elaine looked at me. This was an extraction. It was the perfect word. Natalie hadn't left me. She'd engineered a slow exit while siphoning resources, redirecting equity, and constructing an entirely new identity, one built on the ashes of what we had. She hadn't just fallen for someone else. She had planned her escape like a corporate takeover, and the only reason it had failed was because I had anticipated something, maybe not this exact outcome, but enough to install safeguards. Elaine sat back. What do you want to do, Marcus? I can file a motion for injunction today. Freeze all accounts connected to Revive. We could also contact the DA's office. There's enough here for a fraud investigation. I considered that, but I wasn't interested in vengeance. What I wanted was control. I wanted clarity. And I wanted Natalie to feel the weight of what she'd tried to do. Not with anger, not with threats, but with unmistakable legal force. "Let's draft a settlement proposal," I said. "Something strong but reasonable. She gives up the house, returns most of the funds, no criminal charges, just a clean break." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "And if she refuses?" I didn't hesitate. "Then we file everything, publicly. We take it to court," she nodded. "I'll begin drafting." I stood and looked out the window. The sky was clearing. The rain had stopped. And somewhere out there, Natalie still believed she was ahead. She still believed the man she walked away from was the same man she could outmaneuver. But she'd miscalculated one thing. This wasn't about broken hearts or bruised egos. This was about accountability. And I was just getting started. By the time I stepped out of Elaine's office, the air felt different, cooler, clearer. The clouds that had been hanging heavy over the Portland skyline all morning were beginning to shift, light starting to pour through in fractured shafts. But inside me, there was no confusion, no gray, just focus. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was simply done pretending. There's a moment when survival becomes strategy, when defense becomes offense. That moment had arrived. My first stop was the downtown branch of First Regional Bank. Mara Chen, the branch manager, had worked with me for over a decade. She knew me well, my risk profile, my property portfolio, and most importantly, my temperament. When I showed her the trust documentation and explained what Natalie had attempted, she didn't ask questions. She just got to work. Within 2 hours, every joint account was closed or frozen. We opened 3 new ones, 2 under the Ellison Legacy Trust and 1 in my name alone, backed by the trust's legal framework to avoid probate complications. Every automatic payment Natalie had established was reviewed line by line. One stood out $400 per month to a digital branding agency based in Phoenix. I remembered seeing a social media ad a few weeks back. Serene landscapes, candles, yoga mats, a soft female voice talking about retreat, restore, renew. I hadn't realized it was Natalie's voice. But now, looking at the account logs, I knew exactly what it had funded. That ad campaign was powered by my income, my effort, my name. I asked Mara to cancel every future charge, and I made sure the agency received a formal notification from Elaine's office, alerting them that any continued services billed to accounts without my consent would be considered part of an ongoing fraud investigation. From there, I returned to the guest house on the back of the property, the one we'd renovated years ago when Natalie wanted to host weekend workshops. Ironically, she'd never used it, said it was too small, too far from the main energy. I'd always loved it for that very reason. It was quiet, untouched, still smelled faintly of cedar and sea air. I powered up my laptop and worked with Elaine to finalize the settlement proposal. We kept it professional, firm but fair. Every sentence written with the weight of a man who understood both the law and how people break it. Natalie's terms: full relinquishment of the Oregon property. Return of $85,000 siphoned from joint accounts. No later than 30 days from the signing date. No claim to future appreciation or sale of the house. A binding waiver of litigation connected to Revive Collective, past or future. My terms: no criminal charges filed, no press, no exposure. A silent, irrevocable legal exit. Elaine sent the offer to Natalie's attorney by close of business that day, along with a quiet but undeniable warning. If no response was received within 72 hours, all evidence, bank records, shell company documents, transaction trails, trust, violations, would be submitted to the district attorney's Economic Crimes Division. That night my phone buzzed. Not from Natalie, from Trent. This wasn't supposed to go down like this. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Instead, I honored a commitment I'd made months earlier, speaking on a professional panel at a real estate ethics conference in Portland. The irony was sharp. My topic: structuring asset protection in high-risk partnerships. I stood on stage in front of a room of professionals and spoke calmly about red flags, about shared liability, about what happens when people stop reading contracts and start assuming loyalty is enough. Nobody in that room knew what I was going through. But when I said, "Never rely on someone's intentions, only their signature," I saw heads nod with understanding. That was enough. After the session, I checked my phone again. No reply from Natalie. No movement on the offer. She was likely scrambling, consulting, calculating. Letter. She was out of time. This wasn't a standoff. This was structure reclaiming itself. And the man she thought she had left behind? He had already moved on, quietly, powerfully, and completely prepared. The next afternoon, I returned to the main house. Natalie hadn't been back since the day I confronted her in the kitchen. Her car was gone. But the black SUV was still parked outside, the same one I'd seen when I first arrived. Trent's. The front door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside, my shoes silent on the hardwood floors we'd laid together years ago back, when we believed we were building something permanent. The music was off, the lights dimmed. The house felt like a stage that had just been abandoned after a performance no one applauded. Trent was in the living room, crouched over a duffel bag, frantically stuffing clothing into it, gym shoes, rolled shirts, supplements in plastic containers. When he looked up and saw me, he froze, as if I had stepped out of the wall itself. "I was just grabbing my things," he said quickly, his voice thin and defensive. I didn't move from the doorway. I didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at him. He stood slowly, one hand gripping the strap of the bag like a lifeline. "Look, man," he continued, eyes darting. This wasn't personal. Natalie said the marriage was over a long time ago. I didn't come into this to blow up your life. She told me it was clean. She said, I cut him off. And the business you two were building using my money, was that part clean too? He didn't answer. His eyes gave him away, wide, uncertain, the look of someone who suddenly realizes he was in much deeper than he thought. Revive Collective. Cascadia Retreat Holdings, that second stage flip after the shell purchase, I said, calm but unflinching. I know about it. I know everything. The accounts, the shell companies, the Phoenix design firm, Bryce Landon. You should probably tell him to expect a call. He opened his mouth, closed it. His face shifted from confusion to fear. She didn't tell me all that, he muttered, eyes cast down. But she told you enough to make you think you could take this house. Build your empire off something I spent my life earning. Trent swallowed hard. Look, I'm done, okay? I didn't know what I was getting into. I'll back off, I'll walk away. I nodded slowly. You will? And one more thing. He paused at the hallway, gripping the doorframe like he needed the structure to hold himself up. The buyer, Jason Bennett. He's your cousin, right? Tell him this. If I don't receive a formal withdrawal of his offer to purchase this property, by close of business today, he'll be named in the fraud complaint, along with you, along with Natalie. Trent looked like he'd been slapped. He nodded once, muttered something that might have been, got it, and rushed out the door, the duffel bag slamming awkwardly against the frame as he left. The silence that followed was total. I stood in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of a life that had nearly been taken from me, not by force, not by chaos, but by slow erosion, by calculation, by theft wrapped in calm smiles, and now the house was mine again, no longer just by law, but in presence, in peace. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Elaine. Jason Bennett's agent just emailed. He's formally withdrawing the purchase offer. The file's closed. I exhaled, the breath deep and final. The trap had closed, not with a bang, but with precision. 3 days later, I sat across from Natalie in Elaine Turner's conference room. She hadn't spoken to me since the confrontation in our kitchen. Everything, since then, had gone through attorneys. Hers, a sharp-tongued young man in an expensive suit who looked like he practiced cross-examinations in the mirror. Mine, steady and unshaken like always. Natalie looked composed, at least on the surface, but her posture gave her away. Rigid, ankles crossed too tightly, jaw clenched. She hadn't worn her usual oversized sunglasses today. No jewelry, no perfume. Just a blank slate version of herself, like she thought the courtroom persona might earn her a better outcome. But this wasn't court. Not yet. This was the last chance for resolution. Before the session began, Elaine calmly slid a small stack of documents across the table. "Before we discuss settlement," she said, "I'd like to submit these for the record." Her voice was flat, almost disinterested. But the contents of that stack made Natalie's lawyer go pale. He leafed through them quickly, then stopped at a familiar name, Jason Bennett. Attached was an affidavit. Jason had confessed everything: his role in the shell company, the agreement to purchase my home at below market value, the plan to flip it through Revive Collective. His signature was crisp, the notary stamp clean. Admissible, undeniable. Next was the trust deed, ironclad, dated, irrevocable. And finally, a forensic analysis of the bank transfers, highlighting the exact path of $112,000 in siphoned funds. Natalie didn't look at the papers. She just stared at the table, unmoving. Her attorney leaned toward her and whispered something. She gave the smallest shake of her head, almost imperceptible. Then, after a long silence, her lawyer spoke. "We're prepared to settle," Elaine nodded. "Our terms remain the same. Full relinquishment of the property, a return of $85,000, no further claims on shared business assets. In return, we drop the pursuit of criminal charges and allow this to resolve civilly." Natalie finally looked up. Her eyes met mine for the first time in weeks. "And if I refuse?" she asked, voice low, brittle. Elaine didn't flinch. "Then we move forward, with everything." There was no threat in her tone, just certainty. Natalie looked back at her lawyer. He touched her arm, subtly urging her to consider. "We need a moment," he said. They stepped outside. I didn't move. Elaine and I sat in silence, the kind that settles over people who know they've already won, not through power or performance, but through preparation. 17 minutes later, they returned. Natalie didn't meet my eyes this time. Her lawyer placed the signed agreement on the table. "We accept the terms." Elaine reviewed it, signed, and passed it to me. I didn't hesitate. I didn't gloat. I just signed. Natalie's signature came last. Elegant, familiar, unchanged even now. I had seen that signature on birthday cards, anniversary letters, tax forms, refinance documents, but today it meant something different. It meant closure. It meant she couldn't take anything more from me, and she knew it. As we stood to leave, she looked at me one final time, not with anger, not even with sadness, just with defeat, like someone who'd tried to steal a house and learned it had walls far thicker than she ever realized. 3 months later, I stood on the back deck of the coastal house, the house that nearly slipped through my fingers, coffee in hand, watching the Pacific roll in with its usual quiet force. The water didn't care what had happened. It moved the same way it always had, consistent, rhythmic, eternal. There was comfort in that. The property had changed since the settlement. I replaced the aging siding with weather-resistant cladding and updated the windows with storm grade. That's not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to rebuild it on my own terms. I wasn't trying to erase what Natalie had done. I was simply making the space mine again, a new chapter with cleaner lines and stronger materials. The kitchen, once her sanctuary, was now mine. I'd removed the island she insisted on years ago and replaced it with an open counter facing the ocean. I didn't need the decorative flourishes or designer touches. I needed space to breathe, to move, to reflect. I kept the cottage at the back of the property untouched. It had become my workspace, a place to think, to plan, to consult quietly with former colleagues and emerging nonprofits. A few weeks ago, I began advising on a new housing project in New Zealand, helping design resilient communities along seismic fault lines. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebuilding in places where things had been shaken to their core. I had also taken the funds Natalie returned, every last cent, and invested it into a commercial property in Portland's Old Town. A modest office, building with a history of turnover but solid bones. just like me. I restored it slowly with intention. It's now home to 2 nonprofit tenants, both focused on housing advocacy. I hadn't heard from Natalie since the day she signed the settlement. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Revive Collective had launched in a limited capacity, smaller than planned. Fewer investors, more hesitation. The sparkle had faded. The online ads stopped appearing. The Instagram account went quiet. Felt no satisfaction in her struggles. Just distance. Just clarity. The version of me that might have held on to bitterness was gone. What remained was a man who had survived an attempt to quietly dismantle everything he'd built, and not only held the line, but reinforced it. I took another sip of coffee, let the wind cut across my face, and felt the chill anchor me in the present. This house was never just about bricks and wood and title deeds. It was about who I had become inside it, the lessons it taught me, the strength it required. It was never about revenge, it was about reclamation. Quiet, steady, earned. And that, I realized, was enough. What this entire experience taught me is simple, yet it's something we forget when we trust the wrong people or underestimate our own preparedness. You don't have to raise your voice to be strong. You don't need to chase revenge to claim justice. And you certainly don't need to match someone's chaos to prove you've won. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to do nothing in the moment, then respond with quiet structure, with facts, with legal truth that cannot be twisted. In the end, I didn't just keep the house, I kept my center, my identity, my dignity, and that matters more than any victory could ever feel. Because when someone tries to erase you from your own story, the best thing you can do is keep writing it, page by page, brick by brick, on your own terms. If this story made you think, if you've ever felt quietly underestimated, betrayed, or dismissed, remember this. Your strength is in your patience. Your value is in what you build. And your voice doesn't have to be loud to be heard. Thank you for watching and sharing this moment with me. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to take back control without shouting? Let's talk about it below. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to subscribe. More are on the way.